When I turned the key and my car engine answered me back, hollow and tired, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. That night, I slept sitting upright, my coat wrapped tight around my shoulders, my breath fogging the windshield like I was some stranger hiding from the world. The streetlight above flickered every few seconds, and each time it did, I felt exposed, like the light might tell my story for me. I kept thinking, this can't be my life now. But the vinyl seat beneath me was cold and unarguable. Earlier that day, my own sister had laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an awkward one. The kind that slips out when someone thinks they've won. "Well," she said, folding her arms as she leaned against the doorframe of my childhood home, "I guess you should have planned better." That sentence followed me into the car. It hummed in my ears louder than the engine. Louder than the hunger twisting in my stomach. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and cried quietly, because even then, even after everything, I still had my pride. Before all of this, my life was ordinary in the best way. I was the kind of woman people didn't notice much, and I liked it that way. I worked as an administrative assistant for a small property management firm downtown. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I knew how to stretch a dollar, how to cook meals that lasted 3 days, how to turn a small apartment into a home with throw blankets and warm lamps. Every Sunday evening, I called my mother. She'd ask if I was eating well, if my job was still treating me right, and whether I'd thought any more about moving closer to family. My older sister, Lorraine, lived just 2 blocks away from her with her husband and 2 teenage boys. She was always the responsible one. The favorite. The one who handled things. I didn't resent her for it. At least, not then. My father had passed years earlier, leaving behind a house with peeling paint and memories that creaked louder than the floorboards. Lorraine moved in with Mom to help out, and I stayed where I was, sending money when I could, visiting on holidays, bringing pies and flowers and staying out of the way. I believed we were a family. Flawed maybe, but loyal. The first crack came quietly, the way betrayals usually do. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Lorraine called me, her voice thin and rushed. "Mom's health is getting worse," she said. "We need to talk about the house." I remember standing in the break room at work, my coffee going cold in my hands. "What about it?" I asked. "Well," she sighed, "maintenance is expensive. And since I'm the one living here, taking care of everything, it just makes sense to streamline things." I didn't like the word streamline. It felt sharp. "What do you mean?" She hesitated just long enough to make my stomach tighten. "We were thinking of refinancing. Using the equity. Just to make things easier." "We." That word again. Lorraine and Mom. Decisions already made. "I'm on the deed too," I said carefully. Another pause. "Yes, but you don't live here. And honestly, you don't contribute much to upkeep." That wasn't true. But I didn't argue. I trusted her. I trusted my mother. They were my blood. A week later, Lorraine asked me to sign some papers. "Just formalities," she said, sliding them across the kitchen table. Mom sat beside her, quiet, eyes fixed on her tea. I skimmed the pages. Legal language always made my head spin. I asked, "This won't change ownership, right?" Lorraine smiled. "Of course not. Don't be dramatic." I signed. Within 3 months, everything unraveled. The refinancing turned into a sale. The sale turned into an eviction notice with my name on it. Somewhere in that maze of paperwork I hadn't fully understood, my rights had been erased. I confronted them the day the letter arrived. Lorraine stood in the living room, arms crossed, that same posture she'd had when we were children, and she'd caught me sneaking cookies before dinner. Mom sat on the couch, hands folded, eyes wet but distant. "You sold the house," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "We had to," Lorraine replied. "Mom needs care. And frankly, you're not exactly in a position to help." I laughed then. A short, broken sound. "So you decided to help yourselves?" Mom finally looked up. "You'll land on your feet," she said softly. "You always do." That was the moment something in me went very still. I had 30 days to leave my apartment too. The rent had been rising. And without the small financial cushion I thought I had, money I'd assumed was tied to the house, I was suddenly drowning. I asked Lorraine if I could stay with them. Just temporarily. I even offered to sleep on the couch. She tilted her head, considering me like a stranger. It wouldn't be good for the boys, she said. They need stability. Stability. In the house that used to belong to all of us. The night I moved into my car, I parked 2 streets away from my job. I didn't want anyone to see. I folded my clothes into grocery bags, tucked my shoes beneath the seat, and kept my purse clutched to my chest like an anchor. The world didn't end that night. It just went quiet. In the weeks that followed, people noticed changes. I stopped joining coworkers for lunch. I washed my face in public restrooms and learned which gas stations had the cleanest ones. I learned how to sleep lightly, how to wake at every sound. When Lorraine found out, because someone always does, she laughed again. "You're being dramatic," she said over the phone. "It's just temporary." I didn't tell her I'd been living that way for 3 months. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been watching, listening, learning, and while they were laughing, I was planning something much quieter. There's a special kind of loneliness that settles in when you realize no one is coming to save you. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It just sits beside you, like a weight you eventually stop noticing, until you try to breathe deeply and realize you can't. I learned how to make my car feel like less of a failure, and more like a shelter. I cracked the windows just enough so they wouldn't fog completely at night. I kept baby wipes in the glove compartment, and a small bottle of lavender lotion I'd dab behind my ears, just to feel human. I learned which parking lots were quiet after midnight, and which security guards looked the other way. Every morning, I woke before sunrise. Not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid of being seen. I ironed my clothes at a laundromat 2 towns over on Saturdays, pressing the wrinkles out slowly, deliberately, like I was smoothing out the last visible signs of collapse. At work, I smiled. I typed. I answered phones. No one guessed that when I said, "Have a good evening," I was returning to a life folded into a sedan. What surprised me wasn't the exhaustion. It was the clarity. Stripped down to the basics, I started to see my life, and my family, without the soft blur of obligation. I replayed conversations in my head, hearing the small dismissals I'd ignored for years. Lorraine had always spoken for me, decided for me, and I had let her. One night, while scrolling through job listings on my phone in the car, a memory surfaced. Something my boss, Mr. Caldwell, had said months earlier while we were filing lease agreements. "You've got a good eye for numbers," he'd remarked. "Ever think about moving into property management yourself?" I'd laughed it off back then. I'm more of a behind-the-scenes person. But that night, sitting in the dark, that comment felt different. Like a door I hadn't known was there. I started paying closer attention at work. Not just filing, but understanding. How properties were valued. How landlords structured deals. How maintenance costs were offset. I asked questions. Took notes. Stayed late when I could. Mr. Caldwell noticed. "You're hungry," he said one evening as we locked up. "That's not a bad thing." I didn't tell him the kind of hunger I meant. A few weeks later, he offered me extra hours helping with bookkeeping for one of the smaller buildings the company managed, a tired brick structure with 6 units and a leaky roof. The owner was elderly, overwhelmed, and considering selling. That building became my education. I learned how even neglected places held value. How patience could turn broken things into livable ones. I learned that money wasn't just something you earned. It was something you understood. And quietly, without telling anyone, I started saving. Every extra dollar went into an envelope I hid beneath the spare tire in my trunk. I skipped coffee, walked instead of driving when I could, ate meals that came from cans and kindness. The nights were still hard. Winter crept in, bringing cold that seeped into my bones. I woke once to find frost on the inside of my windows, my breath puffing like smoke. I almost called Lorraine that night. Almost begged. Instead, I wrapped myself tighter and whispered, "Just a little longer." The day I moved out of my car, there was no fanfare. I rented a small studio apartment on the edge of town. The walls were thin. The carpet smelled faintly of old cleaner. But the door locked, and the bed was mine. I sat on the floor the first night and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief so sharp it hurt. I didn't tell my family where I lived. Lorraine called occasionally, her tone casual, almost bored. You doing okay? She'd ask, like she was checking the weather. I'm fine, I'd say. And for the first time, it wasn't a lie. Years passed in small, steady increments. I advanced at work, took night classes in finance, learned how to read contracts without my head spinning. Mr. Caldwell retired and sold the firm to a younger partner who valued my experience and promoted me to operations manager. I became known as reliable, quiet, smart. I bought my first investment property at 48, a duplex with cracked tiles and good bones. I renovated slowly, doing much of the planning myself. When the first rent check arrived, I held it in my hands longer than necessary, feeling its weight. I didn't celebrate with anyone. Then one afternoon, a familiar address crossed my desk. The building. The one Lorraine and Mom had moved into after selling the house. A 3-story brick place with 12 units and a history of deferred maintenance. The current owner, an out-of-state investor, was looking to sell. Quickly. I stared at the listing longer than I should have. Mr. Caldwell's voice echoed in my head. Every building tells a story. Some of them are just waiting for the right listener. I ran the numbers. Once. Twice. Again. It was risky. It would mean stretching myself thin. It would mean stepping back into a story I'd spent years escaping. But it would also mean something else. Choice. I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworkers, not my friends, certainly not my family. I submitted an offer through a shell LLC. Kept my name off the initial paperwork. I negotiated repairs, leveraged everything I'd learned. The day the deal closed, I sat alone in my apartment, the final documents spread across my kitchen table. I pressed my palm flat against the paper, steadying myself. I wasn't doing this for revenge. At least, that's what I told myself. I was doing it because I could. Because I had survived. And because sometimes, the quietest endings are the strongest beginnings. The first time I walked into the building as its owner, I didn't announce myself. I entered through the side door, the one tenants used when they didn't feel like walking past the lobby mirror with its chipped corners and outdated flyers. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old paint. Somewhere above me, a radiator knocked in a tired rhythm, like it was clearing its throat. This place had history. You could feel it in the uneven floors, the scuffed railings polished smooth by decades of hands. It wasn't beautiful, but it wasn't hopeless either. I stood there longer than necessary listening. I told myself I was just inspecting my investment, that I wasn't thinking about Lorraine or my mother, or the years folded painfully between us. But my chest tightened anyway, the way it does when your body remembers something before your mind catches up. They lived on the second floor. Unit 2B. I didn't go up yet. Instead, I started working. I hired a local contractor. Nothing fancy, just a man named Raoul who spoke plainly and showed up when he said he would. We fixed the leaky roof first. Then the stairwell lighting. Then the locks on the back doors that hadn't been changed in years. I approved repairs the previous owner had ignored. I answered tenant emails myself. I listened when they complained about noise, about heat, about the way the building felt forgotten. Because I knew that feeling. Weeks passed before Lorraine noticed anything different. She called me one evening, irritation sharp in her voice. Do you know who owns our building now? I held the phone between my shoulder and ear, stirring soup on the stove. No, I said calmly. Why? They've been doing all this work, she huffed. And the new management is thorough. Notices everywhere. Inspections. I imagined her reading the printed memos, her mouth tightening the way it used to when things didn't go her way. Sounds like a good thing, I said. She snorted. We'll see. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from guilt, at least not entirely, but from anticipation I hadn't let myself feel yet. There's a strange energy that comes when a chapter you thought was closed starts whispering again. The official meeting happened 2 weeks later. I scheduled it myself. A tenant town hall. I called it mandatory attendance. I stood at the front of the small community room, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, a stack of neatly organized folders on the table beside me. The tenants trickled in, curious, cautious. Lorraine arrived last, Mom beside her, moving slower now, her hair thinner. her shoulders more rounded than I remembered. They didn't recognize me at first. I had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. My hair was shorter. My posture steadier. The car-worn exhaustion had long faded from my face, replaced by something quieter and harder to read. Lorraine whispered something to Mom, then froze. Her eyes locked onto mine. The room seemed to still. I watched realization bloom across her face. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like fear. I cleared my throat gently. "Thank you all for coming," I began. My voice didn't shake. "I'm the new owner of the building. My name is—" "I know who you are," Lorraine said sharply, standing up. Every head turned. Mom looked between us, her brow furrowed. "What's going on?" I met Lorraine's gaze. "Please," I said quietly. "Sit down. This meeting is for everyone." For a moment, I thought she might explode. But she sat, her movements stiff, her lips pressed into a thin line. I finished the meeting professionally. Explained upcoming improvements. Outlined expectations. Assured tenants that rent would remain stable for the foreseeable future. I didn't look at them again until the end. As people filtered out, murmuring among themselves, Lorraine marched toward me, Mom trailing behind. "You did this on purpose," she hissed. "This is some kind of sick joke." I folded my hands on the table. "No," I said. "This is business." Mom stared at me, eyes wide. "You bought the building?" "Yes," I said. "I did." Her mouth opened then closed again. "But how?" I considered her question carefully. "Slowly," I replied. "Quietly." Lorraine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So this is revenge? You get to be our landlord now." I shook my head. "No. You just happen to be my tenants." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You think this makes you better than us?" I looked at her. The sister who'd always stood taller, spoken louder, decided first. And for the first time, I felt no need to compete. "I don't think about better," I said. "I think about fair." She scoffed. "You expect us to just what? Thank you." "No," I said gently. "I expect you to pay rent on time and follow the lease. Just like everyone else." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you tell us?" she whispered. I swallowed. "Because every time I needed help I did." That landed between us. Heavy and undeniable. They left shortly after. Lorraine furious. Mom quiet, shaken. That night, I sat alone in my apartment again, but this time the quiet felt earned. I thought I'd feel triumphant, victorious. Instead, I felt tired. Owning the building didn't erase what had happened. It didn't rewrite the past or give me back the years I'd slept in my car, afraid of being seen. It just placed us on different ground I had chosen. Over the following months, word spread. Lorraine complained to relatives. Tried to paint me as cruel, vindictive. But the facts were simple. The building was better. The tenants were happier. And I was fair. Sometimes more patient than I needed to be. I raised rent only when necessary. I gave notice. I followed the law. Grace, I learned, wasn't something you offered because people deserved it. It was something you offered because you did. The hardest part wasn't being their landlord. It was being their daughter and sister while holding the keys. Every month, Lorraine's rent arrived late. Not outrageously late, just enough to test boundaries. 3 days. 5. Once a full week. Each time there was a reason. The boys needed new shoes. The car needed repairs. Mom's medication cost more this month. Excuses I'd heard all my life. I treated her the same way I treated every tenant. I sent reminders. Then notices. Polite. Firm. Documented. She hated that most of all, that I didn't bend. One afternoon, she showed up unannounced at my office. I was reviewing invoices when the receptionist buzzed me. "Your sister is here," she said, her tone careful. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Send her in." Lorraine entered like she owned the place, her purse clutched tight, her mouth already set in a scowl. She didn't sit. "You enjoy this, don't you?" she said. I gestured to the chair anyway. She ignored it. "Enjoy what?" I asked. "Watching me struggle," she snapped. "Making me jump through hoops. Acting like you're better than me." I leaned back slightly, keeping my voice level. I'm acting like a landlord. She laughed sharply. Don't pretend this isn't personal. I met her gaze. It's personal because you made it that way years ago. Her face flushed. You're punishing us. I shook my head. No. I'm treating you the same way you treated me. Like someone who should have planned better. The words hung between us, familiar and sharp. For a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Shame maybe. Or anger looking for somewhere else to land. She left without another word. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I didn't feel powerful. I felt heavy. Justice, I was learning, didn't always come with relief. Sometimes it came with clarity, and clarity could hurt. Mom called a week later. I'd like to see you, she said softly. Just us. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. The kind with cracked vinyl booths and menus that hadn't changed in 20 years. She looked older than I remembered. Frilier. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee. I didn't know, she said after a long pause. Didn't know what? I asked. How bad it got, she whispered. Living in your car. Losing everything. I watched her carefully. You knew I asked for help. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I thought. Lorraine said you'd be fine. She said you were exaggerating. There it was. The familiar deferral. Lorraine had always been the interpreter. The filter. I needed you, I said quietly. And you believed her instead. She reached for my hand, her fingers warm and unsteady. I am sorry. I let her hold it, but I didn't squeeze back. I'm not angry anymore, I said. But I can't pretend it didn't change me. She nodded, accepting that. I'm proud of you, she added. You built something. I looked out the window, watching cars pass. I survived something, I corrected. The building came later. After that, things shifted slowly, unevenly. Lorraine stopped being late with rent. She stopped calling me at all. Mom tried harder. She called more often. Asked questions instead of assuming answers. It was awkward, but it was real. As for me, I kept working. I bought another property. Then another. Nothing flashy. Just solid buildings with good bones and stories that needed listening. I hired people who reminded me of myself. Quiet, capable, overlooked. Sometimes late at night, I drove past the street where I'd once parked my car to sleep. The street light was still there, still flickering. I never stopped, but I always slowed down. Not out of pain. Out of respect. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. Lorraine decided to move. She showed up one last time, standing in my office doorway, eyes hard but tired. We're leaving, she said. Found a place closer to the boys' school. I nodded. You'll need to give proper notice. She scoffed weakly. Of course. She hesitated, then added, you didn't have to do all this. I looked at her. Really looked. At the woman who'd always been louder, stronger, until she wasn't. You're right, I said. I didn't. She waited, like she expected more. I did it because I could. I finished. And because I deserved a life where no one could take my home from me again. She swallowed. You think I'm a bad person? I considered that. I think you made choices that protected you at my expense. She flinched. I don't hate you. I continued. But I won't shrink myself to make you comfortable. That was the truest thing I'd ever said to her. She left without another argument. The building stayed quiet after they moved out. New tenants came in. The walls were repainted. The lobby mirror replaced. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. But it became mine. I learned that redemption isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself or demand apologies. It grows quietly, in the space where bitterness could have lived, but didn't. After Lorraine moved out, I expected to feel lighter. In some ways I did. The building felt calmer, less charged. The air in the hallways seemed to settle, like a held breath finally released. But there was also an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. Not longing exactly, but the quiet after a long argument when you realized the noise had been anchoring something you didn't know how to let go of. I filled that space with work. I threw myself into renovations, into tenant meetings, into long walks through buildings with my clipboard tucked under my arm. I learned the sound of healthy plumbing, the smell of mold before it showed itself, the subtle way a tenant's shoulders relaxed when they realized they were being heard. I became known for that. She listens, one woman told me once, her voice surprised. Most landlords don't. I smiled, because listening had once been the only thing I could afford. My relationship with Mom found a fragile rhythm. She visited my apartment for the first time one afternoon in early spring, bringing a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil. She stood just inside the doorway, looking around like she was trying to read the story of my life off the walls. "It's nice," she said. "You've made it warm." "I like varmt," I replied. She nodded, like that explained everything. We sat at my small kitchen table, the sunlight slanting across the floor. She asked careful questions. I gave careful answers. Neither of us rushed. It felt like learning a new language together, one built on honesty instead of habit. "I should have protected you," she said suddenly, her eyes fixed on her coffee. I didn't rush to comfort her. I let the words sit. "Yes," I said. "You should have." She exhaled shakily. "I can't change that." "No," I agreed. "But you can change what you do next." She reached across the table then, this time squeezing my hand. I let her. Healing, I learned, wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small choices made without an audience. Years continued to pass. My portfolio grew modestly but steadily. I never chased flashy deals. I preferred slow growth, buildings that reminded me of myself, overlooked, underestimated, but solid if given care. One afternoon, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. Lorraine's handwriting covered the envelope, tight and unfamiliar. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on my desk for 2 days, my fingers brushing it each time I passed. When I finally did open it, I read it standing up, like I might need to leave the room quickly. She didn't apologize. Not directly. Instead, she wrote about stress. About fear. About feeling like everything rested on her shoulders after Dad died. About making decisions she thought were practical, not realizing who they would crush beneath them. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter ended. "But I wanted you to know I see you now." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Seeing, I thought, was a beginning, not a conclusion. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because some closures don't require replies. The true moment of understanding came unexpectedly, years later, when I received a call from one of my tenants. A young woman named Renee who'd recently lost her job. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I don't want to lose my place." I listened. I remembered. We worked out a temporary plan. A reduction. A path forward. After the call, I sat back in my chair, my throat tight. That could have been me. That was me. And suddenly everything clicked. The building hadn't been my revenge. It had been my answer. An answer to the question I'd asked myself in that car years ago. What kind of person will this make me? Not bitter. Not small. But steady. One evening, as I locked up the building, I paused in the lobby. The new mirror reflected a woman with calm eyes and a straight spine. Someone who knew her worth because she'd lived without it. And survived. I thought about that night in my car. The cold. The laughter. The way I'd whispered, "Just a little longer." I hadn't known then how much longer it would be. Or how far I'd go. I turned off the lights and stepped outside, the door closing softly behind me. The street was quiet. Peaceful. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was outrunning my past. I was walking beside it. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that version of me. The woman folded into the driver's seat of her car, afraid to turn the key because she didn't know where she'd go next. I wish I could tell her what I know now. That being laughed at doesn't mean you're weak. That being abandoned doesn't mean you're unworthy. And that losing everything doesn't mean you've lost yourself. I didn't win because I bought a building. I won because I didn't let bitterness build a home inside me. I chose grace not because my family deserved it, but because I did. Because I wanted to sleep at night knowing I hadn't become cruel just to survive cruelty. Some people think redemption has to look dramatic. Like a confrontation. Like an apology shouted across a room. But mine came quietly. It came in paid bills, in steady mornings, in keys that jingled in my hand, because no one could take them away anymore. I don't tell this story to shame my sister or my mother. I tell it because someone listening right now might be sitting in their own version of that car, feeling invisible, disposable, laughed at. And if that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. Your life is not over because someone betrayed you. Your value does not shrink because your family failed you. And the strongest comeback doesn't always clap back. It stands still and grows roots. I didn't get revenge. I got peace. And it turns out, that lasts longer. So I'll ask you what I still ask myself sometimes. If you were given the chance, would you choose bitterness, or would you choose to build something better? If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. I read them more than you know. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life quietly, I hope you stay a while. There are more stories like this, slow, honest, and human, waiting for you here.